Hello, I do have a call-in number with the ending two digits of 95, if I can find out who that would be that is giving us a call.
My name is Steve Bunton.
Thank you.
You got everybody tracked?
We have everyone. Supervisor Erson's trying to connect. I do not have Supervisor Lacey. We have a form.
All right, the hour of 4 o'clock having arrived, we will call the meeting of the Marathon County Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee to order. First item is public comment period. Does anybody wish to make a public comment? Any public comments? Any public comments? If not, we will move on to the minutes of the January 18th meeting, which are in your packet. What are your wishes?
Mr. Chairman, motion to approve.
Moved by Chair Gibbs. Is there a second?
McEwen, second.
Seconded by McEwen. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of the minutes will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. We will now move on the two transfers for, or excuse me, timeline for ARPA applications. And I think since the last discussion, there have been some tweaks, and I'll turn it over to Administrator Leonard to highlight that. It's here for educational purposes, but we wanted to make sure you knew about it before tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Chair Robinson. I'll be very brief. You do have within your packet the presentation that will be provided to the full board by Chair Robinson today relative to the ARPA project request process. The only substantive change we made, and certainly if our experience is such that we should change that process moving forward, we certainly have the ability to do so. But if you look to what is page 12 of 15 of the packet, we have the application timeline. You'll recall that previously we had envisioned potentially 3 phases or 3 application periods within any given year for projects to be proposed, make their way to administration, be evaluated, presented then to the HR Finance and Property Committee, and taken to the full board. In light of the work that was done in developing the form, all of the various pieces of information that are going to be submitted to administration, and any potential follow-up that would need to be marshaled through administration and disseminating that to department heads, particularly for those projects coming from outside the organization. We limited that to 2 applications periods per year. I don't know how many ARPA project requests we're going to receive, but our initial thought was that 2 periods per year gives sufficient time for individuals to submit their requests and sufficient time for that evaluation that I referenced. If our experience is such that we believe we're better served by having 3 application periods, it's certainly something we can revisit. We just didn't want to pursue something that was operationally not feasible. So we went with 2 periods in any given year. Again, given the timelines that you have to encumber those funds through 2024, it does provide a sufficient, I think, a sufficient number of opportunities for individuals to submit those projects. But that's really the only modification to that timeline that is proposed. And again, that's on page 12 of 15 of your packet.
Are there any questions relative to that? All right, we will then move on to the review of the 2021 work plan, and that is the committee work plan. There is a spreadsheet that was included in the packet for your review. It's the one that we've sort of built on with cryptic notes and other things, but I think it's always important for us to do a check-in on where we are with our progress, and We had a number of things thrown at us last year that we didn't envision, as the administrator does in his work plan. But we did develop the committee work plan, and we thought it important for us to review it now that we're into a new year, and perhaps at the next meeting, talk about what we might want to try to accomplish this year. And there's this year, till the end of this session of the county board, and then beyond that. So I think between Lance and I, we will try to cover each of the areas. And we welcome input, and we appreciate the efforts of individual committee members who worked on work groups. Priority-based budgeting, Lance, I'll turn that one over to you.
Sure. So for many of you, you've heard the term priority-based budgeting before, but that's a system that the county has been utilizing for a number of years to essentially, through an intentional process, try to evaluate our programs and rank them into a series of 4 quartiles. One being those things that are essentially core to the county's work and align very closely with our strategic and comprehensive goals, down to quartile 4, which are those things that we're not required to do, perhaps don't closely align to those goals that we have, and perhaps are not of the most impact to the residents of the county. That said, our utilization of that system, I think, has left a lot of opportunity on the table over the last, well, quite honestly, since I've come to administration. I think there's been areas where we've had opportunity to use that system more. So pursuant to your work plan, former Deputy Administrator Jason Hake was doing some work with departments to essentially revisit the data that was within the system, make sure that we addressed any issues regarding the integrity of the data. We did some work around brainstorming some opportunities for collaboration and program improvement, including cost savings. But the outcome that was desired was to educate the county board and the committee on how to really update our expectations around the program and enhance its use. Certainly, again, a fair amount of work to be done there. I think there's also a conversation we need to have about whether or not the return on investment for that program is really such that we should continue using it long term.
So in other words, we have not, I think we still have some uncertainty as to where we're going. I think the new ERP system will enhance some of our capabilities to do some evaluation. I think one of the questions that we should ask is, once that system is up and operational, is do we need to spend that $60,000 a year in priority-based budgeting that we're doing it, or would that money be better spent elsewhere? I know that there have been some discussions about, again, whether or not we should increase the capability to do analytics and analysis and take those funds and spend them on increasing our capability internally. So we'll come back and do that, but we have had ongoing discussions on where that is. The capital improvement process, and Supervisor Leahy was leader of a group that looked at our capital improvement process, and we did make changes to the KIP process last year, removing the Capital Expenditure Review Committee, instead of relying upon this committee to do that. And I think the concerns were that that KIP committee spent considerable time reviewing projects. It was worthwhile, but it came here and we always second, third guessed it, and they really weren't clear as to what their role is. And the whole concept of how much funding do we have for these projects is ultimately a county board role. And we modified the process to rely more heavily upon facilities staff who have the expertise and understanding of what our buildings need. And I think that process worked well. We continue to have some ongoing issues that we need to I think, pay attention to, such as rolling stock and how we will deal with the funding of infrastructure as it relates to our IT department in the desire to go to annual leases versus acquisition of the property that we'll have to look at from a capital perspective going forward. But in terms of the process itself, I think the process worked well last year. I think we can look at that going forward, but we continue to need to look at the rolling stock and how we're going to deal with IT issues going forward. Anything you'd like to add?
No, nothing for me. Thank you.
Performance standards for the programs, we had talked about trying to develop dashboards. I'll turn it over to Lance.
Sure. This has been again, a longstanding desire of the board, and it really aligns well with our discussion about priority-based budgeting. The idea that we have good information on what programs we have and how effective they are at delivering the outcomes that we're looking for. Essentially, the long-term goal that I've heard the board talk about again for a number of years has been one of development of a dashboard that has those programs and services of most interest to the board with key performance indicators for each. And when I said this aligns well with priority-based budgeting, the reason I said that it aligns well with Chair Robinson's point about perhaps the resources, the funds that we utilize for priority-based budgeting would be better allocated to the staffing and budget that we would need to implement this. And as you'll see in column 3, that was in fact one of the dependencies that this committee identified for this goal to move forward, identifying budget and staffing capability to deliver that dashboard. I know one of the systems within the county that is most interested in moving in this direction is our criminal justice system. In fact, a data analyst position was one of the top priorities that was identified through our system budgeting discussions in 2021 as part of our budget development process. So there's clear need within the criminal justice system, but I think there's also need across the county in all of our various departments and all of our systems for that dashboard sort of approach where we can see what the programs we're delivering, get some idea of how much we're delivering in terms of service, how well we're doing it, and perhaps most importantly, whether anyone is better off as a result of the service we're delivering.
Are there any questions on those areas? Questions? If not, we'll move on to long-term facilities plan. I'll turn, Lance.
Sure, thank you. So right now, as noted in the what would be the second column from the right, in terms of an update as to where we are, we have an existing master facility plan that we're well underway down at the Lakeview campus relative to the North Central buildings. We're in the middle of, I shouldn't say middle, we're in the process of finalizing design for the relocation of social services to that Lakeview campus. We also have undertaken the West Side Master Plan. We had that out for requests for proposals. The proposals were evaluated. They have selected a vendor for the completion of that master planning project. My understanding, we have the contract finalized. We are working on the scope of services that is referenced within the contract to get those details ironed out. But you see a series of important facility master plans that would be part of that foundation for the long-term facilities plan for all of our buildings. Certainly, the county has talked for a number of years about the future of the highway department. This West Side Master Plan envisions a future where the highway department is not located on West Street, but we don't have a future site identified that we are, at least that I am confident, is going to be able to be purchased by the county at this point to be utilized for that joint facility. Happy to answer any questions on other facility planning efforts that we're doing right now. As many of you know, and I presented to this committee before, we did submit a grant through the Neighborhood Investment Grant Program through the state of Wisconsin for the Regional Forensic Science Center. The proposed location for that facility, in the event that funding does come through, the proposed location was on West Street. However, we have not heard yet relative to the status of that grant.
Evaluation of health insurance options, self-funded plan design, et cetera. We'd like to thank Supervisor Fisher for his work in that area and turn it over to Lance.
Sure, I'll be brief, and if you have any questions, Molly and Christy are here, and they know this project a lot better than I, but I would characterize this project as going very well. The work group that Chair Robinson referenced was formed. We did go out for a request for proposal with USI. They provided a great deal of information relative to our market options. As Chair Robinson referenced, simply put, whether to maintain a fully insured plan delivery or move in the direction of being self-funded. Ultimately, as you all know, we continued with our current provider, Group Health Trust. It's envisioned that we will continue to utilize USI in the coming year through the budget process to reevaluate those steps, because I think as anyone, or reevaluate those options, I should say, because as everyone knows, that health insurance market is a very dynamic one. Anything that Molly or Christy want to add? I see head shaking in the negative.
Diversity, inclusion, employment policy and practice review. This was internal to the county as an employer, and I think this has become highlighted in light of the worker shortage and how we approach recruiting and retention, but I'll turn it over to Lance.
Sure. The Diversity Affairs Commission has actually been assisting in that endeavor. They've been taking each of our employment, chapters of our employment policy, which are available online under the Employee Resources website, to essentially read through those policies and offer their perspective relative to opportunities to enhance our existing policies. We did envision working with the University Year program to do what I term as an environmental scan to identify best practices. However, we haven't been able to, as far as I know, have we made any headway on that? Molly, do you want to add?
I don't know if I'd call it headway, but I have had a number of meetings with those two students that have been assigned to the project, and they are doing some research and should be reporting back shortly, I would assume.
Excellent, thank you. That's all I had, Chair.
Okay. Tax delinquent property process in policy setting.
I know I can add a little bit here, and I know Kim is on the call, and I don't know if anyone from the Treasurer's Office has been able to make it, but one of the big things we did within the previous budgets was take some allocated time in the Corporation Counsel's office to assist in the property listing process that is currently performed in the Treasurer's Office, as we had significant increases in the filing of records within our Register of Deeds office related to property transfers or mortgage satisfactions. And the high level of property transactions has continued through all of 2021 and into, as far as I know, into 2022. So we're still trying to address that backlog. I've had a couple of conversations with Treasurer Beiersdorf about that and Deputy Treasurer Cherrick. With respect to the sale of currently held properties that were taken through tax deed, I know Kim has been very proactive in trying to get many of those properties before this committee. And I know that Kim is on. Do you want to provide any other update, Kim?
Sure, I can do that. Basically, what we have now is small parcels that are between two properties. Like we have one parcel that's a driveway between two businesses. We're not going to be able to sell that type of a parcel. We have several others that are similar to that, that are very small. Maybe there is a drainage ditch going through the property or some other type of encumbrance that would prevent them from being buildable lots. So that's primarily what we have in our portfolio right now. I know that the Treasurer's Office has identified the top 50 tax delinquent properties, and they have sent those to a title company to have the title work done on those, to bring before you to get approval to take those as tax deed. And then as soon as that's done, we can start the process to get those sold and back on the tax rolls.
Thank you, Kim. The only other piece I'll add, it was envisioned, at least when we framed up this project and speaking with the committee, that we would also undertake a review of whether or not, I mean, one of the foundational questions is whether we operate through a tax deed process outlined by statute, or we move to an in rem jurisdiction. We certainly haven't made any headway on that. That's really a question that we're going to have to engage not only the committee, but also better understand through the Corporation Counsel's Office what those advantages and disadvantages would be. But as Kim said, right now, the focus has been within the Treasurer's Office on two things. The property listing work we need to catch up on, and then those high priority tax deed properties that have been set out for title work. And then Kim and her staff have done well to really get us down to those pieces of property that quite honestly are going to be difficult for us to sell.
That 50 represents, what is it? How many, what are we looking at in the context of tax delinquent parcels that we haven't taken?
As I understand it, there's potentially up to 400
That's right.
parcels that we have. Now, some of those parcels, the committee has clearly decided that they do not want to take. As I understand it, there was up to 400. Now, I do know the treasurer was working on some of those, and so some of those may have been cleared up and or been put on payment programs. So we're maybe below that number.
Any questions? Okay, new position request process and ranking? Turn it over to
Sure.
you.
Through the budget process, historically, one of the steps that had been done is that new position requests would come to the HR, Finance, and Property Committee essentially for ranking for the budget process. There was discussion about taking a different approach. When we built the budget in 2020, for the 2022 budget, I should say, the new positions requests that were funded they had widespread support through our system budgeting process. We also had additional positions that were fully funded through each of the departments through alternative revenues, most notably solid waste. And we haven't had to use that ranking process. And in my mind, my preference would be to utilize the system we did for the 2022 budget, which is positions are either simply funded or not funded through the budget. As your administrator, I'm a big fan of clear direction as to what I need to accomplish with the budget, and I thought last year's project process worked fairly well. We had strategies on the administration side within each of our departments where the new positions were being allocated, that we had strategies essentially how to fund them. So that would be my thought process moving forward, that we could maintain that sort of process for future budget preparation, but certainly if this committee has a different stance, we can do that.
I think what led to this being included was a desire to try to rank those projects that weren't funded so that people had an understanding of their relative ranking amongst those unfunded positions. So should we get challenges that came to the county board, there would be the ability to enlighten them. I think some of the impetus for that change has been addressed through some of the changes to the criminal justice system funding. So I don't know if there's as critical of a need as we thought a year ago to make those changes. Do you want to talk about what we talked about today at Rules Review?
Sure, and I appreciate that clarification from Chair Robinson. There may be value in ranking, and we can address that I'll try to recall that for the 2023 budget building process, that when we do have positions, if we do have position requests that are not funded, that there may be value in ranking those, so that when, that's a different perspective that I appreciate. As it relates to rules review this morning, the only modification to the new position request ordinance that exists that is going to be proposed through rules review, and that ordinance is section 4.20, was the deletion of the requirement that administration group requests only in the months of March and August to bring before the HR Finance and Property Committee. The language was changed to reflect a change from shall to may. The impetus to that was a conversation that I had with Chair Robinson, and simply put, the needs of our organization don't always align very well with hard and fast rules around timing. I understand the direction from the board is still to, if we are going to have multiple requests, try to group those, but when it is not feasible or impracticable, to simply proceed. So that modification was suggested this morning, and the Rules Review Committee directed staff to make that change in language for presentation to the new board at its organizational meeting.
Any questions? If not, policy and sale and disposition of excess county property. I think this was is tied into the long-term facilities plan and in context of what is surplus on the west side, but it is also deals with facilities such as social services, River Drive. Should we abandon that? We need a policy on how we will deal with disposition of those properties. We've had requests for some of them or interest in them historically. And that's a policy decision. We've talked about it at the committee level before, but haven't made much progress. I think that we need to, this year, probably spend a little bit more time on setting up the policy parameters that would guide the process by which we would dispose of surplus property, whether requested or if we go out for proposals.
The only thing I would add is I think I agree with the context and the comments made by the chair. The only thing I would add is that I think the conversations relative to tax deed that you've had over the last couple of meetings and the criteria that are set forth in the tax deed ordinance that should be considered when evaluating potential competing bids may be a kind of a good process to follow. A similar process could be followed with how do we evaluate what to do with surplus property. And that would be similar to what Kim laid out at the last meeting, first reaching out to other county departments that may be interested or have a desired use for that property, engaging local municipalities around similar uses, and then getting down into the points that Chair Robinson referenced, going out for requests for proposals. But as the chair referenced, we really haven't made much headway into that, but there is going to be significant need to do so with the impending transfer of staff to the Lakeview campus from the current social services building, the significant likelihood that the River Drive buildings will be vacated in the next couple of years. So the county is going to have occasion to have some significant conversations around the disposition of current assets.
Strategic plan we'll deal with later in the agenda. Customer service expectations, policy setting. That was an issue that I had asked that we look at in context, and it came from my years with DNR, and it got into such things as how soon do we respond to emails and phone calls and other things, and do we have certain basic customer service expectations for our employees in responding to constituents and requests. And
At this point, I think, as you referenced before, we're going to have a lot of opportunities with our new Workday system, and I think putting in place, you know, the threshold's not the right word. The central piece of all of those expectations is really training and accountability. And I think our expectation amongst the leadership, our leadership team, is that we're going to be able to utilize our Workday system to set the baseline through training, and then also get some, hopefully get some accountability tools within that system as well. But we haven't, given the list of priorities on our plate thus far, we haven't moved that forward either.
tax increment financing, pursue legislative recommendations and criteria. That issue has been an ongoing issue, one of concerns. The role of the county as a member of the Joint Review Board is somewhat limited in what we can do. Christie represents us there, but routinely we are seeing requests to extend the timeframes for or the life of the districts because they're not performing. There are also issues relative to donor TIFs where TIFs have accomplished their mission. They've reached the development and they paid back the public investments, and they use those funds to support other tax increment finance districts with very little input from the county and in little return to the taxpayers who made that initial investment in them. So we were looking at what recommendations, if any, we would want to make to the legislature to improve that process, to bring about greater transparency and really focus in on return on investment so that other taxing entities such as the county schools could benefit from the growth associated with those tax increment districts. So, but we haven't done anything to date. We will look probably to have that discussion in the future. Property insurance evaluation. Lance, I'll turn over.
Sure. Similar to the conversation we had around health insurance, the committee indicated that it would like to have us take a look at property insurance and evaluate what those options were and clarify what the role of the committee would be in that situation. That we were potentially going out for a request for proposals for property insurance. I will say we've had a number of conversations with our property insurer around a number of topics. One that was of interest to me was potentially utilizing our property insurance provider for funding for our computerized maintenance management system. And Mary Jo is in frequent contact with all of our insurance providers, including our property insurer. But at this point, that we haven't put together a request for proposal to look at those options. Again, it's really a function of the dependencies there, our staff time and energy. I don't know if anybody has, Molly, you have anything else to add on that?
Renewable energy policy, that was determining what the role of the committee would be in developing policies aimed at becoming more environmentally and fiscally sustainable. I think it's something that we will want to take a look at, particularly if some of the provisions in the Build Back Better proposal do become law. There's a 30% return and that was expanded to local governments for payback on some of those investments in infrastructure associated with solar and other types of energy. But to just look at when we have building opportunities to make sure that we're looking at a sustainable building and whether or not we can capture funds outside of the county to pay for some of those and on a long-term basis reduce our carbon footprint and make it fiscally sustainable. But we have not done anything that would be working with facilities in administration. And we saved the best for last, the update procurement policy. Thank you to Mike Brunner and Dan Etzes, for their great work. In December of last year, the county board approved a new procurement policy that streamlines, clarifies, and simplifies that process. So we can mark that one off. So any questions on the work plan? Any thoughts on how we could do things better going forward?
John, this is Craig.
Go ahead, Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The long-term facility plan, I know it was an eye-opener to me when we were looking for locations for our forensic science center. And I think it was the administrator. I wasn't aware of the properties that Marathon County owned, and was the figure 1,100 properties. Now I know a lot of them are driveways that aren't really resellable, but is there ever going to be a list of these properties? I just said it would be interesting to see the number of properties that Marathon County does own.
This is Administrator Leonard. I think that reference is pretty close, Supervisor McEwen. I simply ran a search on our property website system, and it returned that many parcels. Now, again, any single parcel or any single piece of property may consist of a number of parcels, but to your point, how many of them are buildable or currently used, how many of them are highway right-of-way parcels that we continue to maintain, or the example that Clerk Trueblood provided, the small sliver of property between two parcels. I think to your overall point, would there be value in having that list and going through and essentially categorizing those pieces of property into a series of categories or buckets that would be meaningful? I think there would be value there. To Clerk Trueblood's earlier point, I think one of the things we need to address is how do we actually divest ourselves of some of these parcels. And for some, it may be easy. It may be something we can simply list, as Kim currently is listing property on on the page within the clerk's office. Others are going to be more of a challenge, and there is certainly a large number of parcels that we're not interested in divesting ourselves of those pieces. In fact, I would say that's probably the vast majority of the pieces that are held. We hold a lot of parcels in county forest land. So to your point, could we put together an inventory? Yes, I think we certainly could do that. The question is, what's the value we're trying to derive from doing so? And in light of all the other projects that you have on your work plan, it's similar to my work plan, and I think what would be helpful for the committee perhaps is similarly what would be helpful for me. What is most important so we know where to put our time, and what are the things that can wait?
Thank you. And I was not insinuating that's a priority. I guess if there were parcels we could get back on the tax roll, it would be beneficial, to the whole county. So that was the direction I was going in. So thank you.
I think your point is absolutely spot on, that there may be parcels that we could get back on the tax rolls. I agree with you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Kurt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, obviously, the work plan that the HR Finance and Property Committee has looked at and has adopted is quite lengthy. What I would like to see is potentially, you know, after the reorg, you know, education of the new Finance Committee, whatever that looks like, whoever the chair is and the assignments that are handed out, and go through and then also re-educate ourselves halfway through the year, but also try to prioritize, because I think there's some of those items on here that are more critical than others. There's no question, and I think that the Finance Committee could provide, especially while we're still administration still does not have a deputy administrator and capacity is an issue. I think you know, identifying who's going to take the lead, as we have in here in some cases, you know, but some of those projects were obviously allocated to the deputy administrator that we no longer have, and so I think this committee needs to prioritize which of these items are the critical items once the Finance Committee is reconstituted after the organizational meeting.
I think we actually did that last year, and I think we should do it again. And the one thing that's missing on this work plan was ARPA. And as you all know, we spent a considerable amount of time, all of our educational meetings for the last 4 or 5 months with public hearings and other things. So as the case with the administrator, reality intersects with plans. And, you know, I think we've done a good job with dealing with ARPA, but what it resulted in is our not being able to achieve success in some of those other areas that we didn't anticipate ARPA at the beginning of the year, and we modified our efforts based upon that funding being available. That will happen every year. So maybe we want to just, for purposes of tracking, maybe create a category and say with ARPA and track our progress. So we'll do that. Our work is not done. Any other comments? And again, I want to thank, you know, we had a good number of our committee members passed with EJ Stark and with Allison and Jonathan and others that have all been involved in work groups and other things that have contributed to progress that we've made. I want to thank all of the members of the committee for those efforts, and in particular those individuals. And we look forward to continuing to chip away at some of those critical issues. And administration. Christy?
I hate to interrupt, and I have a third caller. I'm going to list the last 2 digits of the 3 phone numbers I have. I know 2 of you have already responded, but it just pops up. So I have a last 2 digits is 24, last 2 digits is 82, and last 2 digits is 95. I know 2 of you have already responded, but if you are one of the people calling in and I have not heard from you on one of those, could you just let us know who you are?
This is Supervisor Jennifer. I'm on 8-2.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We're glad that you could connect finally.
Well, I connected at the beginning of the meeting, but you didn't know I was there. I was sneaky.
I won't comment. It's just, thank you. Review the county strategic plan. Back in October, we had an update with Vice Chair, County Board Vice Chair Craig McEwen. We thought that in light of the fact that we were reviewing committee activities and where we were going, where we've been and where we're going, that it might be beneficial to also have that discussion again today. And Craig, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the work plan, which we went over today, I know covers a lot of the objectives in the strategic plan. The 2018-2022 strategic plan, we're entering the last year of that 5-year strategic plan, and with anticipation of we have basically 3 meetings left with this term for this committee, but I do believe that the work plan that was developed by this committee will continue to support the strategic plan. The new strategic plan, which will be 2023 to 2027, when that process starts, whoever's on that committee, I guess the information of the items that or actionable items that were taken by each of the standing committees is going to be very important for that committee, whoever that is, to develop the new 5-year plan. The list, Chairman Robinson, that you came up with, the actionable items, is very detailed. It does cover 7 or 8 of the 12 objectives. Now, I know the HR Finance Committee is not designated as a lead committee for any of the 12 objectives. However, I do believe that the supporting committees, which we're responsible for, 7.1, 10.6, and 10.12, I think are just a small part of them. I do believe the HR Finance Committee probably has accomplished a lot of actionable items that affects probably all of the 12 objectives. I guess that the difficult thing is to determine specifically if any of the actionable plans actually helped implement any of the outcome measures or objectives in the strategic plan. And I think that's going to have to be evaluated by the new committee that is going to be responsible for developing the 2023-2027 strategic plan. But all the other committees, hopefully they have the tracking ability that Chairman Robinson listed with these actionable plans. And just an example, Chairman, you gave the Arpa funds. That was not anywhere, in our plans for dealing with in this year, or even when the strategic plan was developed. So it's going to change, and I believe the new strategic plan can pick up from this strategic plan, because it was developed, and it's like you said, things have changed when this strategic plan was developed in 2018. But as far as the accomplishments that were made, and they're very well listed in your items that we had back in October 26th, that meeting, we went over them. I guess, is there, from the committee, are there any suggestions as far as how we could kind of summarize some of these and try to identify if any of the objectives or outcome measures, were met because of these actionable items? Just an example of 7.1, which is to provide cost-effective and high-quality public safety services. I know back on, I believe it was 6/19 of 20, this committee took action to approve a CIP amendment to the Sheriff's Department's radio tower equipment. And the one outcome measure for that 7.1 states that by December 31st, 2022, emergency response times for public safety and service, such as law enforcement, fire, and emergency medical services will be decreased. Now, did that new radio update equipment that was authorized by this committee, did that actually improve some of the response times? Yeah, we don't know, and I guess, you know, those are things that are going to have to be reviewed by the next committee. So I don't know, Chairman Robinson, if you have any thoughts as far as trying to evaluate some of these. I know you have we have quite a long list, and they're identified by you know, the different objectives in there, what helps, but I think, you know, it can go beyond that.
Sure, and I thank you for that, those opening comments. And I think if you look at, you know, the objective 12.3, which is promote cost-effective public services, I think we've done a number of things in that area. Whether the strategies were identified, but we work, you know, I think some of the things with the KIP process, you know, when we look at what we had identified back in October, you know, we had the ERP program, the whole upgrade of our finance and personnel system falls within that, giving us better management tools. The discussion on the insurance coverage and the evaluation of our coverage falls into that category. Again, the KIP process, and develop you know, that the efforts to develop a long-term plan on the county properties with the master plan and the disposition, the trying to streamline the tax deed process is there. And in going back to 7.1, I think we've identified and flagged, I think Chair Gibbs identified this as a sustainability of the emergency management system to respond on a countywide basis as a challenge going forward. We haven't really addressed that, but that's a challenge. And then we've got the whole Arpa process and how that might fit into it, and that's a to be determined area, because we haven't spent much of the money yet, but we've been trying to be as cost effective and developing the criteria for evaluation, looking at return on investment, benefit to taxpayers, et cetera. I think we can look at the ARPA process as a way of trying to accomplish the goal that we've identified there. But I'm open for other comments from committee members. Any thoughts?
John, if I may add a couple more things.
Go ahead.
And I also noted that the reorganization of airport administration, highway department, register of deeds, that falls under 12.3 also, as far as offering services, you know, to the public. So those are things that you know, may not seem important, but I think in the long run, the county's going to benefit, you know, from that, just from the reorganization for, you know, better operations.
Any other thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, I think one other thing that needs to be highlighted is the system budgeting that we have looked at in public safety. I think that is something that may be able to potentially be duplicated throughout in various areas of the county. So, you know, I think what we've learned is there's value in having those comprehensive discussions when issues cross department lines, because I think when having those comprehensive discussions, we can come to a consensus that adds value to all of those services. So I think that is a highlight that you know, we need to recognize.
Anything else? Anything else? We will capture those and forward those on. All right,
Thank you.
thank you. Item D is establish salaries for elected department heads, sheriff and clerk courts for the upcoming term of office. Next steps. Molly?
Thank you. Let me share my screen here. All right, so pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 59.22, the board must establish an annual compensation for services to be paid to certain county elected offices prior to the earliest time for filing nomination papers for those offices. The compensation may be established by a resolution or ordinance and shall not increase nor decrease during the officer's time and shall remain in the ensuing term unless changed by the board. So unless changed by the board, the salaries for the 2023 and 2026 term for both the sheriff and the county clerk will remain. So they do need to be updated prior to April 15th, 2022. So the previous recommendation of the HR Finance Committee was that the compensation for both the sheriff and the clerk of court be consistent with the compensation recommendations from the compensation study that was completed in 2017. Unfortunately, we will not have new compensation study data available prior to that April 15th date. So this is the latest information that we do have based on a compensation study. So I'm going to provide you with some additional information of surrounding counties' salary points for 2022. However, there are only 2 counties right now who have reported making decisions for the 2023 to the 2026 term. It's also important to note that historically in our resolution, incumbents have received a lump sum payment equal to the county board adopted percentage wage increase for that year. So in 2022, that was a 3% increase. 2021, that was a 2.3 increase, and previous years was a 2% increase that was paid out as a lump sum. Other counties do that a little bit differently, which I'll talk more about here in a minute. So again, this is just a lot of information for you to review. I'm not going to go through every county's salary, but this information is in the packet and it's available for review in consideration of what you wish to recommend for the 2023 to 2026 term. So these are the 2022 sheriff salaries. As you can see, Marathon County comes in at $105,384. And this is what that looks like, kind of a visual representation of where that comes in comparable to other counties. For reference, Eau Claire, La Crosse, Rock, Sheboygan, and Walworth and Washington are the closest counties in comparison in terms of population size. However, that span is about 30,000 people on either side of where Marathon County sits, but those are the closest comparable counties. And as you can see, we're not quite as competitive. So the other counties that have set their salaries for next term are Chippewa and Vernon. However, these are not true comparables. Chippewa County has about 72,000 people difference, whereas Vernon's over 100,000 person difference in population. So again, these are not meant to be true comparables. However, these are the only 2 counties that have reported a plan beyond 2022. So it is a data point that I wanted to make available to you. And those increases were 5% and 6% going into 2023 from 2022, with 2% lifts in the following years. My recommendation based on that and the information would be a minimum of a 10% lift for the sheriff's salary going into 2023. This is what that would look like in comparison to the 2022 rates for other counties. That puts that base salary for a sheriff at $116,472 and puts us in, a more competitive range there. And so this is what that would look like if all other counties chose to do a 5% increase and we went with the 10% increase. So you can see where that falls. And so this is another thing that I alluded to a little bit earlier on that I think is important. Some other counties set percentage increases for each year and then allow that base to compound over the term. Whereas historically, Marathon County has just left that as a variable percentage increase and provided that as a lump sum based on what all other county staff what the board adopted percentage increase is, they get that flat. So that percentage increase is a lump sum over that base salary that does not increase. So for 2022, that salary of 105,844, a 3% lump sum was given for the total compensation of 109. Again, over the past several years, 2 to 3% has been that increase. So if you were to take between 2 and 3%, I kind of alternated it here, that would be an average term compensation of $119,339.11, which, as we saw in the graph, is pretty well in line with comparable counties. Taking a look at the data for clerk of court, so these are the reported salaries of 2022 for the clerk of courts. Marathon County comes in at $87,078, which is a lot closer in line with other counties than we were on the sheriff's side. So again, this data shows 2022 salary comparables by other counties. This graph is the same information of those 2022 rates, but I added in the number of branches just for a frame of reference as to how these other counties compare in terms of the courts. So again, only have those two comparables for beyond 2022. Not real true comparison counties, but those increases were a bit more substantial. However, based on where we are in comparison currently, I would only recommend about a 5% lift here. And I've put together a couple of additional charts to show where we would look if everybody were to increase by 5%, or if we were to increase by 5% and others increased by 6%, we'd still be really well within line of what other comparable counties are doing. So again, similar thing to consider is again that percentage. If you were to go with a 5% increase, that $93,717.70 would be the term average compensation for the clerk of courts. So again, I have limited information as to what other counties are currently doing for post-2022 in this upcoming term, but I'll continue to provide that information and keep the committee updated as I get that. But I ask that you let me know what information it is additional information it is that would be helpful in you making a decision on what to recommend moving forward.
So just for clarification, your 10% lift is above the base, not the lump sum payment, correct?
That's correct.
So the sheriff's been receiving a lump sum above the base. So what is the calculated rate above the base plus the lump sum?
I could take I don't have the answer to that off the top of my head. However, I can certainly, so if we were to look here, that 109 was let's go back to straight 2022 data. So 109 would have been where we came in on this chart here, which is, above here. However, the comparables here are all base, whereas as you can see on this chart here, many other counties who have reported their salaries, they outline a percentage increase and then that salary compounds over time. So they're also receiving a percentage increase. However, it's not necessarily as a static lump sum based on the established salary in the first year of the term. That percentage compounds they'll get the combined number and then get a percentage increase on top of that. So the growth is a bit more exponential than what we've historically done.
But again, if we're comparing one year to the next, it would be nice to know what that base plus lump sum what the increase is over that, you know, as we take it to the county board. I'm sure those questions will come up.
Sure, so the increase, I just want to clarify that I understand the ask here so I can get you the right information. You're looking for what that increase would be above that 109 number?
Right.
Okay. And would that be in comparison to other counties and their percentage increase or their base?
I think we're looking at total compensation, so whatever it would take, you know, if we want to compare apples to apples, so if it is salary plus a lump sum, what
Yeah.
is that?
Absolutely. I will add that it would be difficult to do a true apples to apples, not knowing when and how these other percentages are paid out, but I can certainly gather more information.
I think that would be helpful.
This is Administrator Leonard, and it's difficult for me to follow mathematical conversations, but as I understand the question, the difference, the percentage increase to go from the total compensation from 2022 of 109, $109,019.32 to the proposed total compensation, assuming a 2% increase in 2023 of 118,756 and 97 cents would be 8.93%, unless Christie's going to correct me if she did math too.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. But I think that's what county board, what is the net impact of that?
And I think, again, I just want to make clear, the net impact is based on the assumption that Molly put in that slide of a 2% increase in 2023, because we don't know what the increase is going to be in 2023.
Or
yet.
2024, or 25, or 26. Those are variable. However, as mentioned in the slide and or earlier in the presentation here, other counties do select that percentage going into the term, and then that is fixed.
Can the county board, in establishing the salary for the sheriff, build in a 2% increase each year?
They can.
So then we would eliminate the lump sum. Because you're currently, this chart reflects
So currently, we pay out whatever the equivalent of that percentage increase that's been adopted, the adopted wage increase. We calculate the lump sum based on that percentage and then pay that out. But again, it's variable year to year based on what's adopted. However, if I understand your question correctly, yes, the board could say, we're going to start at whatever the salary is, a 2% increase, a 2% increase, a 2% increase for the next, for the rest of the term. However, that would then compound, which is different than what
which is how we would treat any other employee. You know,
Yes,
when
with
we
other
bill-
with
when
other
we-
employees that receive a percentage increase.
It compounds.
That's correct. However, there is a lump sum option for employees as well. Not every employee is paid out a percentage increase.
This is Administrator Leonard. Molly hit the nail on the head. The fact that we allocated this last year 3% of overall payroll did not mean that everyone got 3%. We had some individuals based on their compensation range or their performance or a combination of thereof that did not. And just to reiterate one point, as Molly referenced, and it's on the same slide that's up here for you, we can do it that way, and I'm not saying we should do it one way or another. Historically, we've operated where the increases are not base building. Other counties do that. It's, again, Molly's wrap-up slide was perfect. Like, this is a lot of data for you. We're bringing it to you early. We'll keep bringing you additional information as it becomes available. But the key question we need help with is, what do you need to feel comfortable making a recommendation from this committee to get to the full board to address this issue? Because at the end of the day, this is a county board responsibility to set those salaries.
Yeah.
Mr. Gibbs?
One of the questions that I know I've had a discussion with the Sheriff's Department and some of their leadership was the challenge that some of the leadership team effectively, potentially, were being paid very close, if not in some cases in excess or above what the sheriff was receiving in salary. And I think that becomes a little bit problematic. And so I think, if we could have because some of those are covered employees and some are not. And so I guess if we could have where the proposed sheriff's salary sits in comparison to what we know is the negotiated terms for leadership in that department, I think might be helpful if that the question is clear. Hopefully the question is clear.
I believe it is. So what you're looking for is, from a department standpoint, where compensation is and where some compression may exist between
Exactly.
leadership, other leadership positions and the sheriff himself, herself.
Are there other information needs that members have as we go forward? It's an educational item today. We'll be dealing with it at a future meeting. Would you like any additional?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Craig.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I guess, just so I understand, I appreciate what Chairman Gibbs brought up. I've heard the same with the overtime that some of the other people are making. They were close to the salary of the sheriff. But so we've never, the base salary has never been increased. It's always been a lump sum for the sheriff. Is that what the administrator said?
Yeah, so the base has not increased in a term. It's increased from term to term, but that increase is paid out as a lump sum, and that percentage is calculated on that base that's established in the beginning of the term.
Oh, okay, so that makes sense. So it was the term. Okay, that's what I was not sure about. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Other questions? If not, we look forward to an update from you as you collect additional information. I would prefer when you do bring that back in, if you could do it both ways with the lump sum as well as a base builder. So a cumulative, just to see, so we have those numbers. So if we're going to do a 2%, increase the base by 2% each year, and we can do that. Just
Sure.
All right, any other questions? If not, we will move on to update on opioid settlements.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I asked this item to be added to the agenda item of HR Finance, simply to give HR Finance Committee a little bit of an update of where we sit on the opioid litigation and the potential settlement that is out there. All of you may or may not know, several years ago, Marathon County entered into an agreement to along with 70 other counties, so there's 71 counties in the state of Wisconsin, and a few municipalities that have entered into litigation against the opioid manufacturers, distributors, and one of those settlements is close at hand. And where do we sit as far as when or potentially when will we see any resources or funding from that? So currently, where we're at is the current litigation is waiting to see if we have reached, from a national level, what they call critical mass. Critical mass has not really been defined as a distinct percentage. However, the higher that we have buy-in by all municipalities, the likelihood that critical mass is going to be reached is likely. So the state of Wisconsin is probably one of the leaders and is one of the leaders in where we sit as far as a positive, and that is we've had positive legislation that effectively limits future litigation against the manufacturers as it stands right now. So the 71 counties, along with the current municipalities that were in litigation that have agreed to a settlement or potential settlement, are the only individual entities that are going to be able to receive funds if the settlement is eventually paid out. And that's a positive, because as opposed to other states where they don't have legislation in place, some of the manufacturers and some of the litigants have said, look, we're not going to settle if effectively we're going to settle today with 10 people or 10 entities, and tomorrow we're going to get sued by 10 more entities and have to settle there. So they want some certainty, and that is what the legislation has provided. So we're there. Marathon County had 100% participation, or excuse me, the state of Wisconsin had 100% participation in the sign-off period. And so all 71 counties and the municipalities have signed off along with the state. So the state has also signed off. What that means is potentially if we do get to critical mass nationally, we will start to see actual resources coming to the county. And we may see the first payment sometime between March and July. Some of the things that we do have to, though, determine yet in the future is whom is the escrow agent going to be? So in other words, what these funds can be utilized for and is prescribed by the settlement agreement. So what we have to work out yet is who's the escrow agent going to be? Where is that account going to be set up? What are the reporting requirements going to be as far as when those funds are utilized? And the instructions is to direct those, if the county chooses to direct those funds elsewhere, or whether we want to pool those funds with other municipalities. Some of the other decision process or decisions that this at some point is going to have to be made or potentially made is, do we wish to potentially look at, because this is a structured settlement over a period of time, where payments are going to roll in from now until the next 20 years, the question becomes, do we potentially sell those future interests for a current payout? Again, none of those discussions have taken place. None of those discussions are going to at this point until we've actually get to some idea where we're at as far as a future settlement. The first payments, again, potentially could be sometime between March and July, and the second payment would come in July. An annual payment thereafter in July is what is contemplated. Again, whether or not we want to monetize that settlement fund up front, because one of the cautions or one of the concerns potentially is, will some of these entities exist 20 years from now to be able to actually fulfill on the agreement that they have? There's some other challenges that have cropped up. One of them is you may have seen that the Purdue bankruptcy in the district court was overturned, and the reason that it was overturned was the Sackler family it was determined that the basis, the grant of the third-party release to the Sacklers. So in other words, the bankruptcy court couldn't release the Sacklers from future litigation. And so that's still back up for discussion. And so there's additional work that's going to be litigation that's going to be done there. One of the things that has, when the county originally entered into this litigation, agreed to pay out the attorney's fees. One of the things that has been worked upon by the law firms that are representing the county is there's a fund that is set up nationally to pay out the attorney's fees and costs. They are submitting their requests to that fund. And currently are going to withhold up to the 20%, not the agreed 25% that we have in our contract. They're going to withhold 20% and put that in trust and wait till they find out what the federal fund pays out. And the hope is that the federal fund for attorney's fees, it pays out the vast majority of the fees that have been incurred. And if that happens, then the hope is that the law firms will be releasing some additional portion of that 20% that they're withholding to the counties for use in pursuing opioid remediation for and opioid treatment for individuals that have suffered. So other than that, like I said, as does the Corp Council, sit on several of those meetings, and we'll keep you apprised of when there's a decision that this committee will have to weigh in on. But at this point, just let everyone know that the critical thing that happened was that the state of Wisconsin had 100% participation in the agreements, and that's critical because that means that there's no portion of the funds that whatever the settlement is going to be is what the state of Wisconsin will receive and or the municipalities. So again, one thing that I would say is the other thing that the legislation provided was that 70% of the funds that are being paid out, or 75% of the funds that are being paid out to the municipalities, the counties, and the other municipalities, and then 25% is going to the state. And I would say that every other state in the United States is envious of where the state of Wisconsin is, because there's no other state that has received the direct portion of funding directly to the entities that are dealing with the crisis that the opioid situation has provided to the citizens where Marathon County is directly impacted, because they're providing the services directly to those citizens.
Any questions?
Any questions that I can answer, I would be glad to try to answer.
Any questions? If not, thank you very much for that update. All right. Next item is operational. Discussion and possible action on tax deed properties. Do we have anything?
Kim, are you still on?
So, no. All right, thank you. We will move on to the next meeting is February 8th at 3:30, either by WebEx or here in person. Anything else to come before us today?
In the second packet, we just gave you a November revenue expenditure, and the very preliminary December one, we are still paying our 2021 bills and finalizing that. So, but we just wanted to get that out to you so that you have that, and we will update it definitely once after January's done, because we are really getting the bills paid and getting things wrapped up.
I feel like I'm back in the 1970s. Anything else to come before us? If not, a motion to adjourn is in order.
So move, Mr.
McEwen.
Moved by Gibbs, seconded by McEwen. All those in favor of adjournment will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. Thank you all for your attention. Sorry, I